Next up, the Lifetime Achievement Award. The recipient and our honoree and keynote speaker this evening is Mr. Peter Young, both a distinguished leader in both business and community service. As president of Young and Partners, he has advised top life sciences and chemical companies around the world, and you know how important those two industries are in the Great Garden State. Beyond his personal achievements, he has devoted himself to continuing and trying to uplift the Asian American voices and spirit through, many of you guys know this organization has been around for quite some time, the Committee of 100. Tonight, the New Jersey Chinese American Chamber of Commerce is proud to honor his remarkable contributions with the Lifetime Achievement Award. Mr. Peter Young, if you could come up, we can all give a hand.
So it's really an honor for me to be with this wonderful group of both established and rising stars in the business community this evening, and to accept your Lifetime Achievement Award. I really admire the three missions that you have. I do identify them, and the Committee 100 aligned with that, to promote business between members, assist Chinese and Asian American business to integrate into the American economy, and to facilitate U.S. trade. I do want to make one comment to Mr. Loftus. You know, had the great privilege of speaking with him before, you know, and about music. And what I didn't tell you is, I did tell you I love music, and I told you I play the guitar, but I didn't tell you I still play the guitar, and I'm in a small band, right? But we do tape the mirrors before we practice, to make sure. But you know, he asked me, he said, well, why did you play guitar? And I said, well, I grew up in Hawaii, and my parents, being, you know, typical Asian parents, they wanted me to learn the piano. And I took some after a while, and I switched to the guitar, and my father asked me, why did you switch from the piano to the guitar? And this is when we were growing up in Hawaii. I said, you can take a guitar to the beach, but you can't take a piano to the beach. So, you know, in terms of, but first of all, I'm very, very honored to get this award. And when I was speaking with Ansso about what to talk about, she gave me a couple of suggestions, particularly the kinds of things I do with the Committee 100, which I'll explain, with the Asian American Career Series program. The one thing I won't do is I won't dwell on my career, what I did and so forth. I have a few examples from my family, but I'm really going to focus more on two things that I think are very important, I feel is important, but very important to all of you. One is, in a world where there's so much disruption and setbacks, it's an unusually large number of disruptions today, as you know. The question is, how do you deal with that? How do you do that as a person? How do you deal with that, you know, in your organization? But the other is a topic that I focus on, which is Asian American career ceilings. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but also what you can, if you're a rising star, how you deal with it, but also for those of you who are already established, what can you do to help Asian Americans succeed? And I'll explain a little bit about that. So, you know, by the way, I'm very fortunate in my career to be in corporate strategy with a leading firm, Bain & Company, an investor with the oldest venture capital firm, J.H. Whitney, the Whitney family, but also an investment banker, both at 3 leading firms, but also running younger partners. And by the way, the comment before that Molly said about New Jersey, there's no question the 2 industries I serve
I do apologize, I'm so
are
sorry.
heavily represented in New Jersey, chemicals and life sciences, so I feel this is a good place to be. But I, in terms of the first topic about disruptions and setbacks, maybe the best way is maybe to illustrate through the history of my father's history and what happened to him and how he dealt with it. I remember he used to always tell us, the 3 children, he said, the one thing you can assume is that in your life you'll have setbacks and disruptions. It is a given that it'll happen. You may not be able to anticipate it, you may not be able to predict, but it'll happen. But the real measure of strength and success is not whether you can avoid disruptions or setbacks. It's what you do about it and whether you can persevere. One of the things, my hobbies, is I love to read about famous people and their histories. And the one thing you'll notice if you go and look at virtually about 90% of them, every single one of them had a major setback in their life. Whether it's Abraham Lincoln or FDR, major setback. And it wasn't the fact that they had the setback, the fact it's how they persevered through those setbacks. So my father is a good example of that. He was a junior diplomat for the old Chinese government before the communists, and he was assigned to Washington, D.C. as a junior diplomat. And this was 85 years ago. He's passed away. And he had studied for it. We all know that in China, in the old style, you had to take these very difficult exams in order to be a diplomat. And my father took that exam, his father took that exam, his great-grandfather took that exam. He took that and he passed, and he was assigned as a junior diplomat in Washington, D.C. Then, of course, there was a civil war in China, and then for a while, no one knew where the Chiang Kai-shek government was. It was being chased all over China and eventually got to Taiwan. So my father was here in Washington, D.C., no government, no salaries being paid, and the U.S. government kindly said, you're here not of your choosing, you're stuck not of your choosing, so we welcome you, to stay here in this country. Now, this was quite a disruption. So if you're a Chinese diplomat and your government disappears, it's kind of hard to continue your career, right? So my father said, well, it was time for a career change. And here's a great example of having to be resilient. And it's very interesting. He said, well, what can I do well, right? And he said, well, I'm a scholar because I studied and so forth. So he got his PhD. He became a leading expert on linguistics and was chairman of the department at Johns Hopkins, at Seton Hall for many years. So that's a good example of how something he couldn't have controlled was totally out of control, massive disruption to his life, and yet he found a way to persevere. One other example from my own family is my father was a professor, and my mother was a professor, and they had 3 kids. But my mother died when I was 3, and my younger sister was 1, and my elder sister was 5. Now, this is devastating because my father is a professor, at that time, professors made very little income. He couldn't much less take care of 3 kids. So for years, all 3 of us, he paid American families to take care of us. And no one would take 3 kids. So he had to divide us among 2, this, that, at different times, different families. Usually didn't last more than a year. And that continued until my father remarried when I was 10. So 7 or 8 years where we got shuffled around from family to family and so forth. That kind of experience is one that probably for most families would be devastating. And the chance that all 3 of us would turn out to be normal human beings was quite low. And by the way, all those families at that time, they looked down on Chinese, right? They did discrimination. In fact, at that time we were living in Virginia because my father was a professor, at Georgetown. And if you can believe it, at that time it was illegal for a Caucasian to marry an Asian. I mean, it's not, I'm older, but you know, this is not 100 years ago. And that's how difficult it was. But what ended up happening was, you know, instead of falling apart, which would have been the most likely case, right, for the three of us to fall apart and have problems, we banded together and said, you know, we acted as like our own mother, right? And we persevered. And the end result is all three of us ended up, well, there may be people who may question whether I'm normal or not, right? But we managed to succeed. And my elder sister went to Yale Department of Law School, became a partner of a major law firm. Actually, she got an award last night from Womankind for her contribution. Lifetime achievement, same thing, different organization. My younger sister went to Yale, Columbia Law School, became partner of a major law firm, and I went into business. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, for all of you, and I'm sure that many of you in the room have suffered disruptions and so forth, but the key is not whether you can avoid them, because it's very unlikely that you'll go through life and avoid a disruption or a setback. It's what you do in order to overcome that. The second thing I want to talk about is basically commenting, and Ansso suggested that I talk about this program that I started and have led for the last 5 years at the Committee 100 on Asian American career ceilings. And I think we all recognize it's a big problem. We don't have any problem getting in the early stages. You know, everyone knows that, you know, 16% of the Harvard freshmen are Asian American, so forth. And this wasn't always true. I mean, when I got at Yale, there were a total of 15 Asians total who were admitted out of a class of 1,200. And that was typical, right? But the real problem comes when they get to the middle ranks. Somehow they get stalled. And the question is why, right? What is the problem and what can we do about it? The Asian American Career Ceilings program at the Committee 100, we've had 50 different events. We've had researchers report on what their research says about why this is a problem, how bad is it a problem, and so forth. And although clearly things are better than they were 20 years ago, it's still a serious problem. So what is it that causes this? You know, if you look at the evidence, you'll see it comes from many, many different sources. Interesting thing is, some are really predictable. Discrimination. Right? Corporations are not set up to really recognize. And by the way, I'm not a DEI person the way some people do. I believe in a level playing field. What I believe in is having individuals, regardless of their gender or regardless of their race, relative to their real capabilities, achieving on a level playing field with other people. That's what I believe, right? And that's what, when I talk about career ceilings, that's what I mean. But what are some of the reasons? And the analyses and studies we do have identified a number of them. One are institutional, right? Companies, many of them have biases, right? It's against Asians, right? And that's a problem. But interesting enough, some of the causes are quite surprising. So for example, by the way, we have just completed a survey. We've gathered the data on the Asian American career ceilings. And I saw the preliminary results this morning. It's very interesting because some of it is intuitive and some of it is not. So one that's intuitive is the respondents felt there's institutional and corporate bias. The other was, interesting enough, is the lack of mentorship and the lack of networking. And it's just a serious problem. And that there's not enough opportunity. Now, part of it is a catch-22. If you don't have Asian Americans at the top, it's really hard for them to mentor people below, but because, you know, but that's a problem. Okay. The third is very interesting. Almost at the top is self-created. Now, this is interesting. And these are people who filled out the survey, who are Asian Americans, and they cited often that it's self-problem, the lack of assertiveness. For example, one of the problems, it's less so as generation goes by, is the fact that Asian parents, well, my parents said, it's very straightforward. Study hard, go to MIT, and you'll succeed. This was it. In fact, I said, well, should I apply to any other schools? They said, no, just apply to MIT. So that's enough. But by the way, you're all laughing because I suspect many of you went through the same thing, right? Your parents said, study hard, keep quiet. But that was very, parenting traits that actually has defeated many Asian Americans. Because the reality is we know that in this country, if you don't speak up, you won't succeed. You have to, you don't want to be egotistical and over the top, but you have to be, to make yourself visible. And so that's one of the things. So there are a number of factors. Interesting enough, the data would suggest that language and accent is a relatively modest amount, right? And so it's interesting, some of the reasons one tends to think are just not true, right? So I think that the lesson to all of by the way, the actual data is going to be released December 3rd. We're going to have a webcast and show the results of it, but also what these respondents said were the solutions, right? What is the best way to solve it? So I think in the end, and one other thing I want to mention is all the data, the researchers, we had researchers speak. The interesting thing, the seed cursing is not true for all Asians. And it should surprise you that Indian Americans do extremely well. In fact, they do better than Caucasians. And take a look at it. CEO of Microsoft, CEO of a lot of Indian. So the question though is, why is that true? And why is it? Because it's not like Indian Americans look white, right? And it's not like they don't have accents, as many of them do, just like Chinese. So what is it? And the data basically says it's the assertion issue, right? In other words, the Indian American culture is different and they're more assertive. The other is they tend to work together as a group. Now, Asian Americans, they're very, very fiercely loyal to their families and so forth. But they're not so good at getting together as a group, right? But look at women. They have lots of women groups gathering, raising funds, promoting women, politicians. African Americans, the same thing, right? Indian Americans, take a look. Look at how many Indian Americans are in Congress and Senate and it's successful. And the reason why is they don't, East Asian Americans, right, don't get together and work together and pool resources and so forth. So that's something that we have to do. So I think my message at the end is this. Number one, we've come a long way, and we should be very proud of that, because if you look at how much has progress Asian Americans have made in the last 30 years, it's pretty amazing. But we have a long way to go. And the people in this room, you can have an important role to help. And in fact, if you look at your slogan, together and so forth, it's consistent with that. So if you are head of a company or a senior manager, reach down, try to help younger people succeed to create an equal playing field, level playing field, and help them with mentorship and so forth. And if you're younger, I would advise you the following. First of all, tell your parents no. I think that's very important. Don't quote me, by the way, or I'm going to get in trouble, but say no. The other, though, is that you have to break through, create mentorships, create networking, be more, assertive, and these are things, and then encourage the institutions you're a part of to give you a fair break. Not an extra break, but a fair break. So at the end of the day, so that message, and the other is, sadly, we're going to have, more disruptions in our lives than we really would like. A year from now, there'll be a list of things. I mean, a year ago, no one thought we were going to have the tariff things and so forth. No one could have predicted that. And these things will happen to our businesses and to individuals. But at the end of the day, the key is how do you react to that and how do you overcome it. So thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure and it's a real honor to be